we have the new Panasonic Lumix S5 II. And it's super exciting because this has 24 megapixels, 4K video, full width, and what we've all been waiting for, phase detect autofocus, and it's only $2,000.
This could really change everything because this is a hybrid camera and that's what the world needs today. People take stills, but 95% of people are creating video content, and this has a lot of video features that even the more expensive Sony and Canon competition don't have, like the ability to create mixed, hybrid, horizontal, and vertical video, which every creator out there knows exactly why that's going to be useful. We're going to test it for everything: portraits, sports, stills, high resolution 96 megapixel images.
And Panasonic sent us what, like 10 lenses?
Maybe more.
So they sent us a lot. We had a lot of testing to do, and we can't wait to share the results with you.
The only real competition is the Sony A7 III because this is the only full frame 4K camera at the $2,000 price point with features like 2 card slots. So this is going to be the main comparison. Let's get started. When Panasonic launched their first full-frame L-mount camera almost 4 years ago now, our single biggest complaint was that there were just no good quality lenses, only a couple of f4 zooms. That has completely changed. It's time to completely reevaluate. This is not all their lenses. These are just the L-mount lenses that Panasonic loaned me for this review. And some of them are really compelling. Of course, we have the standard, 70 to 200 f2.8, 70 to 200 f4, but we also have this matched set of primes. This autofocus tracking seems perfect. It's locked onto my eye, and when I cover my eyes with something, it smoothly moves that subject into focus. And I'm staring so closely at the bokeh to see something pulsing, a sign that it's using contrast-based AF like every other Panasonic camera ever, and there's none of that. It's perfect. When I'm still, the bokeh is still, and when I move, the bokeh moves, but appropriately, not uncomfortably. Good job, Panasonic, you did it, you fixed it. And I'm filming this with the 24mm f1.8 wide open so we can test that autofocus tracking. Now, what's key about these is they all have focus breathing prevention built into the design. So companies like Canon and Sony will do this in the camera by cropping in, but because of the optical design of these lenses, it does not require cropping. They're also the same weight. So if you're shooting on a gimbal, you can switch them out, even up to the 85 without really having to rebalance it at all. And that's not the case with other systems because other systems are stills first, whereas Panasonic definitely thinks about hybrid video and stills shooters. If you have a keen eye, you might have noticed one of these lenses is not like the others. This one happens to have a red ring. This is the Canon 24 to 70 f2.8L EF lens, a DSLR lens. And you'll notice right at the back here is an adapter. This is the Sigma L mount to Canon EF adapter, and it lets me use pretty much any DSLR lens from Canon, and there are just hundreds of different lenses. So I want to try this out and see how it handles autofocus. Now I'm filming this with the Canon 24 f1.4L DSLR lens with that adapter on, and that gives me a little bit more background blur than I could get otherwise. I want to take this opportunity to show one sort of downside to the Panasonic lens system. They're not quite as compact as, say, Sony. Like this is the Sony 24 to 70 f2.8, the lens you probably have on your camera all the time, and this is the Panasonic. And you can see the Panasonic is a big boy by comparison. It's also substantially heavier. The Sony also has an aperture ring on the lens, which I really like. No one lens system is the perfect lens. Like Canon has an 85 f1.2 that Sony doesn't have and Panasonic doesn't have either. So check the lens system to make sure it has everything you need. In this scene, I'm testing how smooth the autofocus tracking is. I'm at 85 f1.8. What I'm looking for is little jumps in the bokeh. Does it track smoothly? Is that phase detect autofocus working, or is it pulsing in and out? It's doing a good job of tracking side to side. By comparison, the A7S III, it's slow, and while you can touch to autofocus, it doesn't track at all. Oh, so slow. The Panasonic S5 II now also supports 6K video, but it's not what you think. See, it's in a 3:2 aspect ratio, like still photos or old TVs. Now you may think that is completely misleading. Nobody asked for that. Who wants that? Creators like myself want that. See, I have to make content for YouTube, and YouTube is 16:9 wide. But then sometimes I have to make YouTube shorts, which are vertical, or content for Instagram stories or TikTok, vertical. And right now, with the 16:9 camera, I have to record everything and then turn the camera sideways and re-record it to get the different aspect ratio. But with 6K in 3:2, I can just shoot a little bit wide and then crop. Now you can crop with 16:9, but with 3:2, you're cropping a lot less. For creators, this is such a useful feature. Thank you, Panasonic. Panasonic also makes it easier to review your videos just to make sure you got the shot. I can scrub through the video, which is something I can do on Canon cameras, but I cannot do on Sony cameras. Yep, it looks in focus and I can hear the audio. Good work. Which camera has better video quality in low light? Well, let's find out. Starting out at ISO 3200, the differences are pretty obvious. The Panasonic is wider angle, even though they're both at 85mm. That's because the Sony has a 1.2 times crop in 4K, and you can see that's actually a pretty big difference. Also, the Panasonic automatically corrected the white balance of the incandescent light, so the color is much better than the Sony's old color process. ISO 12800, the Panasonic looks clearly better, smoother, cleaner, probably because it's using 44% more sensor space than the Sony does with its crop. But wait, what the hell is that? The bokeh is pulsing. The bokeh is pulsing. This was supposed to be fixed with PDAF. The bokeh is still pulsing with a completely still subject. This has been an ongoing problem because of contrast AF, and I really hoped it would have been fixed. Oh, you're so close, Panasonic. ISO 51000 represents near darkness, and the Panasonic looks great. The grain is very film-like, but there's still that pulsing. Oh. Rolling shutter makes straight lines seem tilted when panning a video camera. The slower the sensor's readout speed, the worse the rolling shutter is. We count the lines on this flickering light to determine the sensor's readout speed and thus rolling shutter. In full frame 4K 30 mode, the readout speed is about 1/48th of a second, and that explains why it can't do 60 frames per second, where it would have to read out at least 1/60th of a second. If you drop to APS-C, you can do 4K 60, and then the readout speed is 1/73rd of a second. The A7 III, by comparison, is actually a little bit better, with a readout speed of about 1/56th of a second. Thus, the A7 III will have a little bit less rolling shutter, but it's pretty close. For this, I'm turning on all the stabilization. It'll crop in a little bit, so I'm using the 18mm lens. I'm moving from different amounts of lighting so I can see how it handles the auto exposure, which is a pretty big deal. Obviously, the auto exposure really needs work. It should keep my face at a constant exposure. Keeping in mind I'm using an unstabilized lens, this is amazing. This is the greatest sensor stabilization I've ever seen in a full frame camera. It is truly gimbal-like. But if you look closely, you can see the background makes a few awkward jumps. Shooting handheld in low light in the real world, well, I wasn't blown away. You can see at 24mm and 1/25th, some shots are nice and sharp, but others the stabilization just failed and introduced just a little bit of camera shake, even at the reciprocal rule. Still, other times I got sharp shots all the way down to 1/5 of a second. And if you shoot continuously, you can get a few sharp shots. But if you're thinking about upgrading from Micro Four Thirds, the Micro Four Thirds stabilization system is still definitely superior.
I have my favorite athlete, Tony, in the background, and he's going to run while I compare the Panasonic to the Sony A7 III. I have them both with a 70-200 lens, and I have them both zoomed out to 200mm. So let's see how they track.
In the sequence from the A7 III, the sharp shots are in color, the autofocus shots are in black and white. They both shot about 7.1 frames per second, but the A7 III got 4.1 sharp frames per second. That's not bad, but it doesn't match up to modern competitors like the Canon R6 or even the Canon R10. The Panasonic S5 II did well. This is the first Panasonic camera I wouldn't mind recommending for parents of kids who shoot some sports, but it didn't do quite as well as the A7 III. It averaged about 3.4 sharp frames per second. But I'm an extremely fast and intense athlete, so it was playing on hard mode. The consensus for sports, the S5 is acceptable, but not world class.
There was some blackout on the Panasonic. It was a little less consistent.
This is a first for us. We're testing a Panasonic camera for wildlife. The reason we've never done this before is wildlife is the most challenging on the autofocus system. And every time we've tested other aspects of the autofocus system, we've been a little disappointed. Here at my bird feeder at 600 millimeters, the autofocus is pretty good. It's actually really good. It's not super fast. It's not Sony A1 fast. It's not Canon R5 fast, but things come into focus. And with animal recognition on, it recognizes the entire bird and will focus on it. Now, it's not smart enough to see the eye of the bird, but you don't really need that with this lens. You kind of need that pinpoint accuracy when you start working with shallower depth of field, like a 600 millimeter f4. But I think the combo actually works pretty well for birds at the feeder. Moving subjects, a little different. Pixel and I brought this combo out without the tripod onto our kayak. We busted through the ice and we found a pair of immature bald eagles. And the S5 actually locked onto focus pretty well. It found the subject and drew a box around it. But as soon as the bird got in front of a complex background, it just focused on the background basically 100% of the time. So here you can see what could have been a really cool shots that this camera just completely missed for me. Heartbreaking. Here's another example. You can see in focus until it gets in front of the trees and then locks onto focus on the trees. Very Nikon-like. In the L mount, there's really only the one wildlife lens, the Sigma 150-600 at the moment. And when we did a recent lens comparison of our 10 favorite wildlife lenses, we ranked this one number 10 out of 10. So it's not our favorite lens, but it is capable. People do get good results with it. So if you're a hardcore wildlife photographer, I'm going to steer you towards like a Canon R7 at this budget, or even a Nikon D500 DSLR. But if you want a general purpose camera and you might shoot some wildlife, I'm glad to say, really for the first time, you can do that with this Panasonic L mount camera. It does work and it's enjoyable. Good work, Panasonic. What about that Canon lens adapter? I tested that with my Canon 500 f4 and the results were unsatisfactory. The focusing was extremely slow. You have a Sigma adapter connecting a Canon lens to a Panasonic body, and it's a wonder it works at all. I would not recommend it for telephoto purposes. Instead, you'll stick to this 150-600. Something interesting, the video works really well. I put it into 4K 60 mode, which has a 50% crop. Like basically it's an APS-C sensor, but it gives you a full 4K readout. And this focused just as well for video as it does for stills, but that's noteworthy because every other camera I've ever tested, when you switch to video, they mostly lose any sort of animal tracking that you might have, but also autofocus tends to just get much worse. I guess because Panasonic is so video-centric, the autofocus is really completely the same between stills and video, and I got some really nice shots with it. Could the autofocus tracking keep up with our new puppy kit? Sometimes. You can see it does lock focus, but as soon as the dog starts moving, it starts to lag behind. You can see the focus is on Chelsea here and not on the dog, despite the fact that the box was on the dog. And you can see this entire sequence is ruined. And in this sequence, it had focus on her, but then jumped to the background. And again, it grabbed focus, but didn't quite keep up. But when she slowed down, it would grab focus. Now we're in our portrait studio with the Lumix 85 f1.8 and our flashpoint strobes. Let's see how it does. Oh, it caught your hair? Okay. Okay, now I found your eye. With the strobe, the tones and colors look great, but let's zoom in and see if it's in focus. Wow, this is perfectly in focus. The eyebrow, just a little bit out of focus. The eyelashes, in focus, but the iris, perfectly sharp. We wouldn't normally shoot with this shallow depth of field in the studio. We just wanted to test the autofocus, and it succeeded. Now, I did find the occasional shot that had the Nikon-like eyelash autofocus. You can see its front focus just a little bit here, but rattling off a few shots sequentially, even in continuous autofocus, you always got a few that were perfectly sharp.
Can you turn away and turn back?
The latest generation of Sony and Canon cameras will track the face even when it's turned away and focus as close to the eye as possible. We found even shortly after I turned back, it just couldn't catch focus. It always took a few seconds to actually lock back into focus.
It worked well. It wasn't super fast, but it was locking into place at a good rate, and the pictures look good to me.
I think it's fine for traditional portraits. If it were like a high-speed portrait, this wouldn't be my first choice. The sync speed is 1/250th, which is fine. Overall, I think it's good.
The Panasonic S5 Mark II has a high-resolution feature that stitches together a 96 megapixel image for tripod shots. This is a feature cameras at this price point just don't have, so this is pretty amazing. It's raining outside, so here's a boring shot of my living room. Look at how much more detail you get from the 96 megapixel image. The textures of the fabric in the wall just feel real. And there's no stitching problems, which I always get on Sony cameras unless I'm in a very solid basement, so it seems more resistant to bumps. It also did the stitching in camera. Sony requires a separate app on your computer to process the images, which means you can never see whether they turned out in the field. The S5 II has a separate mode to combat movement in an image in case people are walking through a scene, and it works. This is a usable camera for high megapixel images in the field if you're willing to bring a tripod.
So in summary, we did it again, Tony. We pushed another camera to failure by being the nitpickiest people alive. No, but really, this camera is excellent. And there's a reason we test cameras so hard, because we want to know what they're capable of. And this is a camera we can trust to get the job done.
I am happy with the lens selection. I am happy with the autofocus for creators like me who don't have a cameraman, but you just jump in front of it and you hope for shallow depth of field. This camera is remarkable at that price point. It is absolutely what I recommend for hybrid shooters who lean towards the video side. I think Panasonic's made an excellent infrastructure for it. What an incredible camera.
I'm so excited. Thank you, Panasonic. This is an amazing camera. I know that you all are gonna love it.
Now, I didn't compare like the dynamic range to other cameras, but the fact is that has not changed in years. It's gonna be the same dynamic range. The S5 II, I think it's solidly better in just about every way than the A7 III or the Nikon Z6 or Z6 Mark II. Those are its closest competition. For something like mostly still shooters, I would probably rather have the Sony A7 IV for general photography. And for sport shooters, I would pick the Canon R6 Mark II, but those are both 25% more. And for those of you also shooting video, this has a lot of video features that those simply lack. I would happily switch to this as our main camera if it had a full frame 4K 60 mode. It does not, it crops in. But I think the next Panasonic S1 probably will do full width 4K, so I can't wait to see that. By the way, we have never accepted money or free gear from any camera or lens manufacturer. This is just loaners, it's all going back. We make our money by selling photography education. So check out our store at northrup.photo, subscribe to see more free reviews, and if you have any questions, write a comment down below.
Thanks so much for watching.
Bye.